PS4.
What can the best mechanic in LS do for you?
You need something, huh? One of your rides? Let me know. It's coming at you. I'll get back to it then. I'm on the clock. What you want? Some wheels? It's on the way.
What brings you in today? Good to go. You got some beef with the Ballas or something? Just looking at that engine gives me a hard-on. Look at sh. hairpin turns are gonna be F-U-N. Can't go wrong with a little extra under the hood. Here for the magic touch? Better than new.
on the E-way? Yo. You trying to cut up on the E-way? Nigga, just hop out that motherfucker. I'ma shoot you out that bitch then, and then you ain't gotta pay for it. Come back towards me. You're dumbass. You could've just came back to me and I could've shot you out the bitch and then you would never have to pay for it. I'm just finna say it don't matter anyway, nigga. You got money to pay for it. Shit. I mean, I should pull y'all shit out. Bro, you know how long I've been saying give me one of these bitches, bro? I need to change the smoke to this bitch though, cause I don't need that shit. The pearlescent. I don't care. Like it don't even match. Like it don't match the car at all, bro. Yo, 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 what up, kitty? The Rapid GTS. Rebel. Rebel. Oh yeah.
Whatever.
Well, fuck your kind of nigga. I'll hop on Warzone later, bro. Dude. What's down now? Oh shit. Damn. I tried to cross, but then I seen that only go down. Nah, I'm good. What the fuck? Oh yeah. I forgot all about this motherfucker here.
Why can't you fucking move? Come on, man. Shit, I gotta be somewhere.
What you say? Yeah, come on. Yeah, good looking. Without this, whatever car it is. Truck, I think. Yeah. Ain't gonna lie, that bitch nice. Damn, bro. You good back there? Oh, whoa, whoa. Hey, bitch. Hey, hey, they turned it to me, I don't know, we finna turn and hop on this expressway down now. Whoa, what the fuck? Hold on. You good, my guy? Alright. Nope. I tried, it ain't work. Alright, come on. What'd you say? What you mean? You probably got your volume down, that's why. Like in your settings. Yeah, dude, cause when the oh, well, I don't know. What's good?
Here for the magic touch?
Damn. Ah! What the fuck was that? Go what up? Cause like I kinda crashed like a few times, so oh this is hey the map out to get us. What you mean come on? I didn't hear you crash because of me, bro. Alright, we gonna wait on you, bro. We going back down that little two-strip right there. Alright, come on. Oh shit. Hey boy, your ass cannot drive, my guy. Oh shit. Ah, leave, okay, bro. What you doing? Damn. I tried to squeeze through that little fucking tight ass maneuver right there. Nope. Damn. I'm catching up. I crashed in two. I crashed twice. It's over with. I see y'all last hour up there. I should have kept shit right there. I don't know. Keep going now, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Nah, we gonna wait on him. We gonna wait on him. Stop. I'm finna call my car back. Fuck that. Dale. We Oh, yeah.
Here for the magic touch?
Hey, y'all just gonna have to listen to this damn music or this fucking whatever this shit is. Cause it's mic tweaking, so y'all gonna have to. Y'all gonna listen to a damn echo, right? Cause I ain't got the mic in no more. That bitch keep tweaking, so. Like, can y'all hear this music that's playing? You said no? Alright, cool then. Oh shit.
It's the best movie in the trilogy. You get an annoying itch around your eye and start to rub it with your hand. But soon, you regret it. Your contact lens slips out of place. Looking around, you can't find it anywhere near.
Now I gotta listen to this shit too.
Get a new one. What you don't realize is that the lens never fell out. It actually got lost in your eye. What happens when someone loses a lens in their eye but doesn't realize it? For one woman, her concern wasn't just a lost contact lens lodged in her eye. It was 23 lenses that got stuck inside her body for months. You get an annoying eye. It was 23 lenses that got stuck inside her body for months. Let's get into it. A 42-year-old woman living in the UK had noticed a little bit of drooping with her upper left eyelid recently. It wasn't too noticeable, so she didn't think much of it and went on with her life. But after 6 months, the same eyelid was swollen. A lump had grown on it and had become painful to touch. The woman saw her family doctor, who referred her to an eye doctor to investigate the issue. Her vision was fine, and both of her eyes seemed normal other than the swelling. There was no strange discharge, sensitivity, or redness. However, doctors could feel a small lump under the skin of the upper left eyelid, and they decided to take an MRI scan to see what it was. The scan revealed that the lump had the characteristics of a well-defined cyst. It was about 8 millimeters long, located just above the patient's left eye. The patient's doctors decided to do surgery to remove it, and something inexplicable happened in the process. Right after being removed, the cyst ruptured, breaking open to reveal one extremely fragile contact lens. The woman and the doctors were stunned. It was a hard contact lens, also known as a rigid gas permeable contact lens. But the patient didn't wear these type of contacts. She hadn't used hard contacts since she was a teenager, almost 3 decades ago. It was her mother who figured out what happened. She remembered that when her daughter was 14, the
Hey,
girl
yo
was
ass
playing a
dope.
game of badminton when a shuttlecock
Actually, no, I'm gonna go down that too.
She recovered quickly from her injury with no unusual symptoms, but never wore hard contact lenses again. The contact lens was lost after the girl was hit in her eye, and she wasn't able to find it. So the family just assumed it had been knocked out and lost on the ground somewhere. But the lens had actually moved into the girl's upper left eyelid, pushed by the impact, and remained trapped there for 28 years without anybody knowing. Doctors assumed that the drooping eye, swelling, and inflammation were all caused by the contact lens, but they couldn't explain why it hadn't caused any issues for so long, or why the symptoms would have appeared suddenly. There didn't seem to be any triggers that could have caused the symptoms to start after so many years. If you find that hard to believe, wait until you hear about this next case. A 67-year-old woman in the UK was being prepped for a routine eye surgery to address her cataracts. For 35 years, she had been wearing monthly contact lenses without issues, so she didn't make many visits to the eye doctor. Her eyes were a little uncomfortable, but she assumed
You calling for
it's a
some
common
wheels?
condition
I'm
caused
Johnny
by
on the
old
spot.
age
I'll
and
hook you
dry
up.
eye. For her cataracts,
boy,
doctors needed to numb her eyes for surgery. One doctor lifted her right eyelid and was about to apply the anesthetic when he saw something strange and had to stop the injection. Under the top eyelid, deep in the woman's right eye, was a huge blue mass, unlike anything
I'm
the
bringing it to
doctors
you.
had ever
Okay,
seen
I got
before.
stuff to do.
They took a closer look and discovered that the mass was actually a clump of 17 contact lenses held together by mucus. Upon closer inspection, a second clump was found in the same eye, this time with 10 contact lenses.
That's crazy as hell.
In total, the doctors removed 27 lenses that the woman had lost in just her right eye. The surgery was immediately postponed because the existence of soft lenses in the woman's eye posed a risk of infection. Soft lenses can be almost like a sponge that absorbs bacteria, and having so many in an eye for an unknown period of time meant that there would have been a lot of bacteria if the doctors had operated.
Hey, this bitch go, bro.
Thought it was possible for this many contact lenses to be lost, and especially for them to not cause major issues. They noted that the patient had deep-set eyes, which might have made it easier for multiple lenses to be lost. The woman explained that sometimes when she tried to remove a contact from her right eye, she couldn't find it and thought she must have dropped it somewhere. The woman's left eye had no lost lenses at all, and actually had better vision than the right one, which made sense now that the lost contacts have been discovered. The lenses were removed. After 2 weeks, the patient reported that her eyes were much more comfortable than before. Doctors decided to publish the case in BMJ because none of them had ever heard of something like this before, and most didn't believe that it was possible to lose so many lenses in their eyes without severe complications. They weren't the only skeptical ones. Many people online commented on the story and how unusual it was that the woman didn't notice the lenses lost in her eye. Most people who have had a contact lens stuck experience irritation, redness, discomfort, and eye infections. But this patient wasn't the only one. Another case that went viral on Instagram, collecting millions of views, shows footage of a doctor in California who recorded the process of removing 23 contact lenses from a woman's eye.
Damn, that's fucked up.
Medical attention for pain and blurriness in her eye. The graphic video shows a close-up of the woman's eye as the doctor lifts the upper lid to reveal a large green mass.
Pain or no pain, your wisdom teeth should be checked every year. If wisdom teeth come in properly and meet the right conditions, they are generally safe to keep. But left unchecked, they can put you at risk for gum disease, tooth decay, and damage to adjacent teeth. Some wisdom teeth grow in at such an angle that they never break through the gum, which can lead to tooth decay, gum disease, cysts, and tumors. These impacted teeth can only be seen on x-rays, so the damage they may cause.
Using a cotton swab, the doctor slides out clumps of contact lens after another, and the patient is shocked that any lenses were lodged in her eye, much less stacked like pancakes. Many of the lenses had been sitting under the patient's eyelid for a month and were stuck together so tightly that the doctor had to use fine surgical instruments to separate them. Apparently, the patient had no idea she could have forgotten to remove so many lenses. The doctor who posted the video, ophthalmologist Katerina Kurtiva, warns people to be more diligent. The video is captioned, "Don't sleep in your contact lenses." According to the CDC, 45 million people wear contact lenses in America alone. Using them means an increased risk of eye infections, since people touch their eyeballs with their fingers and insert a foreign object. And it's especially risky if they don't follow proper care guidelines. If an infection progresses, it can have severe consequences, including blindness. Many people get used to using contacts after them every day, and this can lead to desensitization of their eyes as well as forgetting to be diligent. When the eye adjusts to wearing contacts, the cornea becomes less sensitive and people may not notice when something is off, like these cases we hear about. The FDA recommendations for contact lens usage include having a proper and up-to-date prescription for your eyes, as contact lenses are specific to the user. Contacts also should not be bought over the counter, as this means they are sold without a prescription from unlicensed vendors that are not guaranteed to be safe. Make sure you receive the exact right brand and specifications for your prescription. There are many different types of contact lenses. There are RGP lenses, known as hard contacts, that are durable and last longer, and soft contacts made of flexible plastics that allow oxygen to get through to the eye. Some contacts are daily wear, while others can be worn for 2 weeks or 30 days. No matter what type of contacts are being used, it's crucial to read the instructions for each type and know what you should or shouldn't do. It's especially important to note how long you should wear your contacts for, and how often your eyes should have a break. Even if you have perfect vision, it's still necessary to get a prescription for decorative lenses, since they are still considered medical devices, and places that advertise them as cosmetics and sell them without a prescription in the United States are breaking the law. Decorative lenses are not one-size-fits-all, and an eye doctor should measure each eye to properly fit the lens and see how your eyes will react to contacts. An improperly fitted lens can cause scratches on the cornea, an eye infection, pink eye, and loss of vision. The FDA recommends against buying lenses over the counter from any source.
You gotta speak a little bit louder. I could barely hear you now.
Halloween, costume, novelty, beauty supplies, and cosmetic stores. Clean your lenses properly by following the instructions on the product and those given by your eye care provider. Usually, multi-purpose contact lenses should be replaced 3 months after the bottle is opened. Always use the new lens case that comes with every box.
You talking about the lag behind the crash?
Guidelines on the box, as different solutions have different instructions and companies sometimes change their formulas. And never use lens solutions. Other basics include removing lenses before swimming and not exposing them to any water.
You just seen that shit too?
Microorganisms that can cause infections. Don't transfer contacts to smaller travel containers, as they are not guaranteed to be sterile. And never put your lenses in your mouth or in contact with saliva. Remember not to wear your contacts overnight unless prescribed to do so, as this increases the risk of infection and distresses the cornea by reducing the amount of oxygen getting to the eye and sometimes even causing damage to the cornea surface.
Do I want to get some what?
Never ignore symptoms of eye infections and discomfort, including irritation, discharge, tearing, increased light sensitivity, itchiness, burning, gritty feelings,
Nah, I'm more of a car person.
vision, swelling, and pain. If you experience these symptoms, remove your contacts and keep them off, and contact an eye care professional. Don't throw out the lenses, because they might be useful for a professional to understand what happened. Your eyes are an extremely important part of your body, so caring for them is a priority. Even though many people wear contact lenses without major issues, taking risks is not worth damaging your eyesight or finding yourself in an eye-palling situation.
On a very special TV Dad.
I didn't make the dance team.
What do I always say?
Switch your car insurance to Progressive and you could save hundreds.
BK Muscle here, everyone say cheese, classic bacon and spicy, blame grilled double on the top.
This video will cover exactly what happened to the 6 most notable creeps from Hanson vs. Predator, and we're going to begin by talking about the math tutor Mike Manzi, who's had his life pretty much ruined as a result of the I'm Chris Hansen No You're Not episode. After arriving at the Sting house, Mike bumped into Chris immediately before trying to make the excuse that he was simply making sure that the 13-year-old girl was safe inside her house. After desperately attempting to leave, Mike was arrested, taken back to to the police station and interrogated for approximately 35 minutes, after which the episode ends with the explanation that because Mike's discussion was pretty clean prior to the meetup, he was only sentenced to 3 years probation, meaning that he avoided any time in prison and wasn't registered on any unsavory lists. However, this isn't to say that Mike's life has been easy ever since the episode went live. In late 2021, a conversation was leaked with one of the show's editors, who explained that the head of security, Ron Knight, was actually Mike Manzi's uncle, and that there is a part that never aired where Manzi is insisting to Knight to let him go because he's known Manzi since birth. This is apparently why Manzi made such an effort to convince the crew to let him leave peacefully, yet his uncle told Manzi the best thing he could do is go through the garage and remain silent, which Manzi obviously didn't do. As a result of the episode, Mike now hates his uncle, which has more than likely led to the decline of Manzi's other family relationships. However, the most interesting thing revealed in the message exchange was that Manzi was an avid watcher of TCAP back in the day, which explains why he recognized Chris Hansen immediately. Mike has since been found on a felony dating site, as well as on Facebook under a different name, where a Reddit user was able to get this picture, as well as apparently have a conversation with Mike, who stated that he gets recognized very often, and that Mike actually seems like a very chilled out dude. On Chris Hansen's podcast, Chris explained that Mike is no longer working in education.
As far as we know, he is not tutoring or teaching anywhere. He lives with his parents,
Which would explain two recently surfaced photos of Mike working in a retail job, representing a pretty significant fall since tutoring for some of Connecticut's wealthiest families. However, Mike still got off lightly in comparison to John Dupee, who, as a result of his appearance on the show, has now become homeless. John waltzed into the Sting house without saying a word, and was so creepy that simply standing next to him was enough to terrify the decoy, yet she apparently had nothing to worry about, as he stated that he was only there to watch the football. After revealing that John was simultaneously talking to more than one minor, he was arrested, interrogated, and given a notice to appear in court, where he'd be trolled and heckled by the attendees as he pleaded guilty.
and the judge actually in the case had to order the crowd to be quiet, to be orderly, because they had figured out who he was and what he was being accused of, what he was pleading guilty to.
John Dupee was given an 8-year prison sentence beginning in August 2016, although this certainly isn't where the story ends. Only 4 months into his prison term, John's brother and sister were both killed in a car.
Tier 1 is mostly your more...
Same as my YouTube
Never
name,
chose
bro.
to put family second. When opioid cravings can
No, I
drown
was
out
talking to the
one
chat.
you love.
Dad, are you leaving again?
This video will cover exactly what happened to the 6 most notable creeps from Hansen vs. Predator, and we're going to begin by talking was that Manzi was an avid watcher of TCAP back in the day, which explains why he recognized Chris Hansen immediately. He had prison sentence beginning in August 2016, although this certainly isn't where the story ends. Only 4 months into his prison term, John's brother and sister were both killed in a car accident, which happened on the very same street where the Sting house was located, and in case losing both of his siblings wasn't bad enough, there are unconfirmed anecdotes that John was also disowned by his parents after the episode went live. He was released from prison on the 24th of July 2018, serving just 2 years out of his 8-year sentence, yet after being released, John was forced to register on a public offender list, which displayed his address as a Connecticut homeless shelter. After 3 years in the shelter, John was able to move into a group house, although in October 2021, only 2 months after moving out of the homeless shelter, John violated his probation in an unspecified way and was sent back to prison for another year and 2 months. Since his release in December 2022, John has been residing in a shelter for recovering addicts, although John Dupee isn't the only person on this list who's been back to prison, as Joshua Colon also recently violated his probation. Joshua was the New York plumber who locked the door behind him after entering the Sting house, stating that his biggest nightmare was ending up on a Chris Hansen episode. After Josh comes out of the bathroom, Chris is already there waiting for him.
You know who I am?
Yes. And as a result, Josh is unbelievably honest, laying out his intentions immediately. After being taken back to the station, he'd incredibly admit that this wasn't the first time that he'd met up with someone underage, which eventually helped the court to secure a 7-year prison sentence. After this thing happened, but before Josh went to prison, he was still working as a plumber, and would admit to a co-worker that he was very remorseful and would happily take back his crazy Russian ex, then go back to that house with Chris Hansen. On his really bad days, he would talk about how he doesn't want to die alone, and that he knows that he'll never have a semblance of a normal life again. Josh was sent to prison A few months later in early 2016 and would serve 3 years out of his 7-year sentence. However, this wouldn't be the last time that Josh ended up behind bars. In September 2020, approximately 1 year after being released from his first prison stint, a post was made to the TCAP forum stating Joshua Clone was convicted yesterday after spending a few months in prison for a probation violation. 4 years jail, execution suspended after 6 months, probation 9 years. This guy will never learn. Josh's second prison term came to an end in March 2021, after which his former co-worker and friend took to Reddit to explain the reason for the sentence. He contacted me after he got out of prison for a second time, letting me know that he'd been framed. Apparently he wasn't allowed to have any pictures of any children on his phone. His sister shared a picture of his niece in a chat that he was in, and he got locked up for it, his explanation. Interestingly, if you now search Josh's name on an inmate search engine, it states that Joshua Clone is, or was recently, an inmate currently at the Connecticut Department of Corrections, CTDOC, located in Weathersford, CT, leading many to believe that Josh is now back in prison for a third time. But what happened to the wealthy accountant who Chris recognized from the train? His name was Charles Lawrence, and after walking into the Sting House, the following exchange occurred.
Now, Chris, how are you doing? Look, this is the first time I've caught anyone who I know.
After which Charles was arrested and taken back to the station for an interview. Throughout the interrogation, Charles made the hilarious claim that, because of his poor eyesight, he read the decoys aged as 18 instead of 13.
That's right. That's 18.
However, the judge wasn't dumb enough to buy this excuse, who sentenced Lawrence to 2 years in prison, which he'd served between June 2016 and June 2018. Whilst in prison, the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, under which Lawrence was employed, confirmed that Mr. Lawrence's AICPA membership was terminated effective May 25, 2017, because of a final judgment of conviction for a crime punishable by imprisonment for more than 1 year. Chris also mentioned that Charles had a second job as a commercial real estate agent, and after finding Charles's LinkedIn, it states that he's the president of a company called Lawrence Real Estate Enterprises Inc., which is still active today and lists Charles as the company's CEO. However, Chris did mention on his podcast that Charles had some issues with keeping his license.
I'm not clear as to whether or not he's still involved in commercial real estate. There was an issue with his license after his conviction, after he pleaded guilty.
Although, even if he was able to, it's unlikely that Charles would get much work these days given his reputation.
Hey, I know y'all just seen that. I'm
a post was made to
that.
Reddit explaining that they saw Charles Lawrence living in an over 55s complex, which has been confirmed as true after looking up the address listed on his public offender registry. This page also shows the most recent photo of him, taken in mid-2018, exhausting all of the information that we have on Charles Lawrence. However, we've got plenty of dirt on the now infamous Stephen Buchanan, who gained notoriety for showing up to the Sting House with duct tape, a camera, and various weapons in his car. This was extra terrifying as after arriving at the house, he refused to enter and rather tried to coax the decoy into getting into his vehicle.
Hey, damn.
After being confronted by Chris, Buchanan tries to blame his depravity on the PTSD he got during his military time in Iraq, although despite this impediment, Buchanan still served 3 years in prison, after which fans of the show began to notice that the story he shared with Chris wasn't entirely accurate. A user by the name of Bud1985 took to Reddit in a post reading, "Stephen Buchanan, this took me a good hour of searching through old pics from Iraq, but I finally found it. I served with this turd." Bud continued in the comments by stating, "When he was active duty, he was a tank mechanic, and how do I know this? He was my tanks mechanic. He would do maintenance on it in the motor pool every Monday. He never went on a single mission. He never seen a minute of combat. He may have been through some mortar fire, but that's it. It pissed me off so bad when I heard him blame it on PTSD." The most recent photo of Steve Buchanan comes from July 2022, which accompanies a further update of Chris podcast.
And as far as we can tell, he still lives in Connecticut with his parents, and he's working, driving a large truck.
Also explaining that he was able to have a conversation with
I'm on the clock. What you want? Some wheels?
We had for Stephen Buchanan, and a man picked up it. It actually
I don't know which one it is, though.
It's on the way.
I asked for Stephen. Right away, the man said, "Is this Chris Hansen?" I said, "Yes."
No, the Hellcat.
I said, "I'm calling for Stephen
Like,
Buchanan."
I got two of them in the same garage. Nope, that's not it. That's the wrong one.
Circumstances around his son. He told me that Stephen has moved on with his life, and essentially that he wants to only look forward, and then the senior mechanic asked that I never call the number again.
But while Stephen has done a pretty good job of moving
All right, come on, let's take a trip to my agency.
Significantly more difficult for Jeff Sokol, who became arguably the most notable predator in Chris Hansen history after bringing a pepperoni pizza to the Fairfield Stinghouse. The iconic episode became etched in YouTube history as Jeff seemed so relaxed about the confrontation that he was only able to focus on his dinner.
I want to know a little bit more about you first.
After Jeff spent 16 minutes demolishing his pizza, he'd offer Chris a slice on the way out.
You can take your pizza if you like. Can I fight? I'm good.
And even after being taken back to the station, Jeff maintained the attitude that he hadn't done anything wrong, according to a source who was at the station with him.
We're pretty awesome about people being able to get out, be able to take the lawyer, take care of the case.
While Jeff seemed confident that he wouldn't receive any charges, this didn't alter his reality, as after going through 3 different lawyers, he'd be sentenced to 2.5 years in prison beginning on the 27th of May 2017. Whilst locked up, the Jeff Sokol episode became so popular that fans of the show tracked down the restaurant from which the pizza had been ordered and began to visit the restaurant asking for the exact same pizza that Jeff had gotten. The restaurant has since had hundreds of positive reviews, many of which subtly referencing the Jeff Sokol incident, and according to an email sent to us by a fan, the restaurant had to eventually ask people to stop asking for the Sokol special, although there doesn't actually seem to be any evidence for this claim. By the time Jeff was released from prison in June 2019, his appearance on the show had racked up a view count in the tens of millions, leading Jeff to try and change his name legally to Sonny Derek Porter.
Sokol actually went to court and petitioned to change his name to Sonny Derek Porter.
A few years ago, I was arrested as a part of a sting operation trying to meet a girl who was underage. The sting was part of a nationally syndicated TV show, Crime Watch Daily, Hansen vs. Predator. This episode is now available online, along with many other troll videos and nasty comments from fans of the show. In the aftermath, I've
y'all finna do a run and gun. Y'all wanna do it?
And embarrassment. One could argue that this was justified, but I've surely
run and gun
remorse since the arrest. Since my current name will always be linked by
like RNG.
I'm requesting authorization.
Somebody just send me an invite to it. I wanna
I'm
do
working
it.
hard to be a better person overall and making a sincere effort to treat everyone with respect. I hope to meet new friends and acquaintances and wish not to be judged based on one gigantic mistake I made a few years ago. I hope to be judged for the person I really am, the person I am today. More than anything, I would like a second chance at a happy and safe life. However, the name change was eventually rejected, which only led to trolling. It was then discovered
Hey, don't start it yet, bro.
to sell his apartment, and according to this Reddit comment, which isn't the
People who've been driving with me want to join.
parents in blank. It seems like he comes from a pretty affluent family, so he probably just mooches from his
I don't know about all that, bro.
stays low key. The most recent photo of him
You got better?
2021, which unfortunately marks the final piece of information we have on Jeff Sokol, because despite being one of the show's most notable people, he certainly kept one of the lowest profiles.
Tier 1 is mostly your more well-known serial killers. However, like I said, I'm going to try to keep it fun. Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, was responsible for the murder and cannibalization of 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Basically, what Dahmer would do is he would convince young men to come into
Bro, you were my friends list. That's how I got the invite.
some drinks and relaxation, or
You go ahead and start it if you want to.
During this time, he would kill them, at which point he would systematically
Unless you're gonna invite somebody.
and eat some parts while using the others for decoration. He was eventually caught when one of his victims managed to get out of the room and inform police. When the police arrived to see if Dahmer had in fact assaulted this man, they saw the scene in the apartment itself. The first thing that tipped them off was in the corner of his bedroom with several large barrels that smelled awful. And when looking in one of Dahmer's drawers, they found several pictures of the mutilations he had committed. Then, when opening up the refrigerator, there were 2 preserved heads of his previous victims just sitting in the fridge. While searching the apartment, they came across 4 heads, 7 skulls, 2 hearts, several pieces of muscle,
What we waiting on?
male genitalia, and those barrels that I mentioned earlier were vats of acid he was using to decompose the remains he didn't want. Dahmer confessed to pretty much everything and described in detail his motives and reason for it. He liked the idea of the bodies being around him and said they gave him comfort, and had plans to take the skulls as well as several other bones and construct a sort of arrangement in his apartment that he just thought would be kind of neat. One of the more gruesome details is most often while he was torturing his victims, he would do these sick experiments to them. For example, he would trepanate the skull of several victims before pouring in things like boiling water and acid just to see what would happen. He said his goal in this was to create a sort of zombie partner that would never leave him and be by his side. But that obviously didn't work, so he just stuck with the bodies. And in 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer was beat to death in prison by a fellow inmate. Charles Manson was the leader of the Manson family, named for obvious reasons. And in
I got like 2 million. Let me see. I bet 1,000.
9 Hollywood murders. Charles
That's how much I
Manson
got in my pocket right now?
above this group of
Damn, only got
freethinkers
1,000 in
that very much
cash.
so followed the hippie role model idea and began to tell his followers teachings of a coming apocalypse. He said that this apocalypse would be spurred by a race war that would happen between the white and black population of the United States. So in order to be ahead of the curve, he had his cult kill several high-profile actors in Hollywood and then attempt to blame it on the black community, which he then thought would start the inevitable race war. He called this whole thing the Helter Skelter Plan and figured himself a sort of messiah figure to get his people. The most famous of these murders was Sharon Tate, in which 4 people broke into the Tate residence and killed 4 people, including Sharon Tate, her previous ex-fiance, as well as the heiress to the Folgers coffee fortune. Eventually, everyone was arrested and sent to jail, with Manson himself dying of natural causes while in prison in 2017. John Wayne Gacy is the famous killer clown that killed 33 boys from 1972 to 1978. See, John Wayne Gacy had the side gig of dressing up as either Patches
you got that one.
or things like kids' birthday parties. While on the side, he was abducting young boys, taking them back to his home, in which he would abuse them in various ways before murdering them and burying the majority under his floorboards. See, 33 boys
let me know you behind me.
Found. It's estimated that he potentially killed a whole lot more. However, John Wayne Gacy wasn't exactly the talkative type or very original in his actions. As a matter of fact, when executed by lethal injection in 1994, his final words were, and I quote, "Kiss my ass." To give you an idea of how hated he was in the community, while he was being executed, there was a crowd outside who were having essentially a party and cheering that the clown was finally dead. Jack the Ripper is the name given to the perpetrator of the unknown murders that occurred in the Whitechapel district of London in 1888. 5 women are confirmed to be the victims of this Jack the Ripper, although it's believed by some that there could be more. And while the area of Whitechapel is confirmed, and while there are 5 known victims who were all sex workers at the time, little to no headway in the killer's identity has ever been made. Several of these killings had dissections performed, which leads some to believe that perhaps the person that did it was a surgeon or a medical professional of some sort, while some point out the fact that Jack the Ripper was very intimate with the knowledge of police presence in the city and managed to both murder victims in places they wouldn't be found and then leaving levers in places you couldn't find them. So the theories of this go everywhere from surgeon to cop. Sadly, this killer will probably never be found out, as the majority of the evidence that was amassed against him was destroyed during the Blitz of London. But I mean, you probably don't have to worry about it. It was like over 100 years ago. There's no way the dude's still around. Unless he was a vampire. Ted Bundy is believed to have murdered at least 30 women during the 1970s. Ted Bundy is the quintessential example for not everyone who looks friendly is trustworthy. As a matter of fact, the majority of the ways that Ted Bundy would perform his murders was by either enticing women to follow him or disguising himself as a police officer or some other authority figure in order to get a victim alone. Normally this resulted in them taking in women out to deserted areas, killing them before performing things on their body. The trial was a sort of circus show, with Ted Bundy playing his own lawyer and being very bombastic during the whole thing, which during one of the trial phases he escaped, or tried to. He was gone for a few days, broke into someone's house, stole a gun, and then got rearrested. So yeah, I'm sure he's totally innocent after that. It's believed by many that the main motive for these murders was a sort of sexual deviance. At a young age, Ted Bundy had mentioned that he came across several pornographic novels, to which he got very interested in them, and then was always seeking the next thrill higher. Which even then, it's a really big jump from like dirty magazines to stabbing people. He was found guilty and executed by the electric chair in 1989. Son of Sam is the nickname given to Dave David Richard Berkowitz. He was caught in 1977 after murdering 8 people by shooting. After being arrested, he said that his neighbor had a dog named Sam that was a demon telling him to commit these murders, and went on this whole tirade that Sam would talk to him and tell him what to do and how to do it. Although later, after being convicted and in jail for a while, he said that the whole thing was a hoax to try to get an insanity plea. In one of the letters he left for police early on in the killings, he said that he himself is the son of Sam. Before this, he was simply called the 44 Magnum Killer because that's what all the murders occurred with. In the years since, David's kind of settled down and has said that his actual killings were because he was part of a satanic cult that had killed many more people throughout the country that the authorities just simply didn't know about. And David Berkowitz is still alive in prison to this day. The Zodiac Killer is the name given to the person who killed several people in California from the 1960s to the 1970s. The name comes from the fact that after every murder, the Zodiac Killer would leave a cryptic message that was hidden in a sort of code that the authorities and newspapers would attempt to figure out. He even claimed that in one of these was his true name. The majority of the murders consisted of the Zodiac Killer finding young couples at date locations such as overlooks or a lakeside shore, to which he would then murder them before sending a letter to the newspaper and police afterwards. Now, if you're familiar with the Zodiac case, you'll know that there was a certain author by the name of Grayson who became obsessed with everything the Zodiac Killer did. According to him, who is quite possibly more close to the case than anyone, the perpetrator was a man named Arthur Lee Allen. Arthur Lee Allen was one of the initial suspects, but was cleared of one of the early murders because he had an alibi. However, according to Grayson, it was absolutely him. And while not making any accusations, because haha, this is all jokes, it's theoretical, a lot of the evidence does support that theory, including the fact that shortly after Arthur Lee Allen's death, there were no more Zodiac killings. Richard Ramirez, who is more popularly known as the Night Stalker, was convicted of 13 counts of murder as well as several of sexual assault and breaking and entering. As a kid, Richard had an abusive home life to which he would regularly sneak out and sleep in a local cemetery. Several contributed this to part of the reason that his later fascination with death and the occult came to be. As he got older, he got very into drugs such as LSD and exploring concepts like Satanism. He then began a spree of attacking and then murdering women before he was caught. Several of the jurors were afraid of him because while on trial, he showed no remorse or recall for his actions. And as a matter of fact, after one of the early days of the trial, one of the jurors was found dead in their home, to which all of the other jurors thought somehow the Night Stalker managed to get loose or orchestrate a way to kill the other juror, to which they were all then afraid to return to trial. It turns out that juror died by a totally unrelated murder, but it goes to highlight the fact that everyone thought he somehow did it because that was the kind of intensity he gave off. His final words to the press were, "See you in Disneyland," to give you an idea of his attitude through this whole thing. And also, he was engaged twice while in prison, one of which he was actually married to before she was divorced after figuring out that one of his victims was only 9 years old. In 2013, Richard died of complications due to lymphoma while awaiting the death penalty. We are now on to Tier 2, which is going to be talking a bit more about the lesser known. Henry Lee Lucas was convicted of killing 11 people from 1960 to 1983. Henry definitely had a hard home life growing up. His father was a raging alcoholic, and his mother was a sex worker who would normally take Henry, cross-dress him, and then essentially pimp him out to passerbys. I'm not one to be like, oh, well, this poor person, they did the things that they did later because of what happened to them. But in cases like this, you know, that probably had something to do with it. And it definitely had something to do with the fact that in 1960, Henry murdered his mother, which he was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Although he was released after only 10 years due to prison overcrowding, which...
Behind you, my guy?
Are you sure there wasn't, like, anyone less dangerous than the guy who murdered his mom? Like, I'm sure there was at least one dude in the prison for, like, an alcohol violation who they could have let go instead of this guy, but I digress. After that point, he was in and out of prison a lot for things like theft, as well as killing several people during this time, but what he is most famous for is for the over 100 confessions he made. Now, you may be thinking, wow, he must have murdered a lot more people, but hold on a second. So you gotta realize he was already serving a life sentence. And there were a lot of inconsistencies in his stories. Like, for example, he'd look at the evidence and then they'd be like, you did this? He'd be like, yeah, I did it. And they'd be like, what with? And he's like, what weapon did you say was used again? And it wasn't until later the police started to think about it, because every time he'd come in for a confession, they would like serve him steak and give him all this free time to like walk around outside and think about what he's done. That they were like, you know, maybe we shouldn't like give this guy a vacation every time he confesses to something. Because yeah, it got to the point where like once a week he's like, I am ready to confess another murder, and then you get like a 5-star meal and then go back to his cell, and then next week I'm ready to confess to another murder. You know, because of Henry, they stopped doing that, and he died of natural causes while in prison in 2001. Albert Fish, who went by the names of the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Moon Maniac, and the Boogeyman. This is like side tangent. I can't stand the fact that serial killers are always given the coolest names. Like, there's the whole argument to be made about like glorifying criminals, and I understand that. But maybe like the first step could just be like, don't call them stuff like Jack the Ripper and the Moon Maniac. Maybe if we call these guys stuff like Stupid Baby Man, then no one would want to do any more killings. That's my political stance that I'm running for office with. Stupid Baby Man. Yes. It's like the opposite problem with hurricanes. Because like, no one runs away from hurricanes, they just like stay in the area. It's like, yeah, because you named them stuff like Irene and like Buford. Like, no one's gonna run hiding from a storm named Gary. But if we called it something like the Automated Wood Chipper Death Machine 9000, people might leave. Okay, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, Albert. At the end, Albert Fish admitted to 3 murders, although the estimated number is more in the hundreds. Albert's got to be one of the most evil people who ever lived. He would commit these acts by finding children that he thought wouldn't be missed by society, which in the 1930s most often consisted of immigrants and minorities, to which he would take them to his house and perform acts of assault, dismemberment, torture, before finally killing them and disposing of their bodies.
Damn, we got mine.
He also practiced very extreme forms of self-affliction, such as stabbing and crushing his genitals, as well as inserting glass objects. Anyway, the reason he only admitted to the 3 in the end is because those are the ones that he was being charged with. Although it didn't really matter in the 1930s, because 1 or 1,000, you're going to get killed for it either way. During his trial, they listed the number of sexual disorders he had, and it's like a page, including really gross stuff like necrophilia, as you can imagine, as well as like coprophagia and urophagia and other things. To give you an idea of how hated this guy was, they deemed him insane, but should still be put to death. To which he was. In 1936, he was executed by the electric chair. But shortly before his execution, he had written a letter that morning that he wanted read to the press, to which his lawyer took one look at it and destroyed it, saying it was a senseless and absurd string of obscenities that he had ever read. The Boston Strangler, later ID'd as Albert DeSalvo, murdered 13 women during the 1960s. What's interesting about the Boston Stranglers, to this day, many people believe there to be more than one killer.
Damn, you stole my fucking kill.
Right before he was caught, he broke into a woman's house, which was the standard way that he would go about his murders, to which when the woman awoke, stopped, said, I'm sorry, and left. So DeSalvo was arrested for this, and when interrogated, confessed to being asked if he was responsible for the Boston Strangling. But because of the manner in which he was arrested, and people saying the police did not handle the evidence properly, a lot of people believe that perhaps he was pressured into confessing for the murders of someone else. And in 1973, he was stabbed to death in the infirmary of the prison by a fellow inmate who's never been identified. In recent years, however, due to advancements in DNA testing, the 13th victim had DNA of her killer.
Bro, why is y'all pistol whipping? Stop pistol whipping.
DNA proved to match that of DeSalvo. So he was at least responsible for the 13th murder, but people think that may not mean he was responsible for all of them, so who knows. The Snowtown murders were committed by John Bunting, Robert Wagner, and James Velasquez from 1992 to 1999. After being caught, initially they all testified that they were hunting down pedophiles.
Now you want to run around pistol whipping niggas.
Got away from the justice system, and they didn't want them to hurt any further children. However, after that, it then devolved into like, well, we also killed, like, you know, the homosexuals and other people that we don't agree with. And then it eventually just got to like, well, we killed the weak, which Okay. And in this righteous crusade of theirs, they did things like steal the people's money and personal identity, like their social security cards, which, whatever. Once the bodies of their victims were found in various barrels, and they were all
It don't matter, nigga, I'm still winning.
They were all given life sentences. Ed Kemper, also known as the co-ed killer, was convicted in 1973 for murdering 10 people, including his own mother and grandparents. See, when he was 15 years old, he murdered his grandmother while his grandfather was out with a shotgun.
Yes,
Later saying that he did it just to see what it would feel like. He then was afraid of his grandfather's reaction, so whenever his grandfather came back home, he murdered him too. Somehow, he was released only 6 years later, because they didn't think he was a threat to society, which, yeah, that totally didn't backfire. Kemper was also a master manipulator. As a matter of fact, he tested with an IQ of 145, stood at 6'9", and was known to be able to talk his way into anything. The majority of his murders were by hitchhiking women, to which he would then take them somewhere secluded, murder them, dismember them, take them back to his house, and use
Why you started? I ain't started, he started.
Things. Kemper was eventually caught and given life for all of these murders. But what's wild in reading about him is everyone's like, oh, well, you know, Ed Kemper, he's like a really changed guy now, and he's really reformed, and he says things like, oh, I understand the terrible things I've done, and everyone's okay with him, when we know for a fact he's a super smart master manipulator. And everywhere you read on him, they're like, he's a different man now. And he's eligible for parole somehow, and in 2024 is going up for parole again, which, no, don't let that guy out. Peter Sutcliffe, also known as the Yorkshire Ripper, here we go with the cool names again, murdered 13 women between 1975 and 1980. The majority of his killings were that of sex workers, which he said he was told by God to cleanse them from the earth. However, he was also like hooking up with them, so like, is that really why you're doing it? Are they really that awful? Okay. And interestingly, the thing that got him caught was he was pulled over for having an expired license plate. And Peter died last year of COVID while in prison. Aileen Warnos killed 7 men from 1989 to 1990. Aileen worked as a sex worker, and she would be picked up by men on
I don't know why the fuck everybody leaves it.
Shoot them before going away and then starting the process over. She had sort of a rough history leading up to the actual murders. Like, for example, she had already been in jail for armed robbery and was in several vehicle accidents and just proved to be all around reckless. During her trial, she argued that every single one of these circumstances was self-defense. Initially, she said that all of the men attempted to sexually assault her, but then she changed it and said one of them sexually assaulted her, and she was just kind of afraid that the others would. But she also hid the bodies by dumping them off the sides of roads, to which they were found later, and she never came to the police saying that she was assaulted, so you can't, like, go to trial for a bunch of murders and then be like, oh, those were all defense, I just forgot to call. Whoops. She was executed on October 9th of 2002, and her last words, which I have to read off to you, were,
that was a fun game, I guess.
would just like to say, I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day, with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back, I'll be back. So, take that what you will, it's something alright. The DC Sniper was responsible for 10 murders in 2002. It turned out later that the DC Sniper was actually 2 people, those 2 people being John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo, aged 41 and 17 respectively. What not a lot of people know is that this pair had actually killed an additional 7 people before the DC shootings ever took place. They essentially had a crime spree driving through the South, in which they would rob someone, shoot them, and take their stuff, which left a lot of people dead, as well as a lot severely injured. The actual DC shootings themselves consisted of the pair making a makeshift sniper hide out of their vehicle, to which they would park it in populated areas, take a shot before driving away and doing the same thing somewhere else. During the investigation, authorities were baffled that someone could shoot a gun in the middle of the city and no one see them, and that's why the car makes sense. Because all it consisted of was them pulling up, firing out the back in a makeshift hole that they had drilled underneath the license plate, before getting away. The way that they were finally caught is in one of the many phone calls that John Muhammad had with the police. He bragged about getting away with murders previously in the South, to which the police then figured out about one of the 7 murders I mentioned earlier, and then linked that to John Muhammad and eventually found them, to which they were then arrested inside the vehicle itself. After Muhammad was sentenced to death, Malvo came forward and began to give details of why they did it. Muhammad was in the military and grew very anti-American sentiments. His plan was a 3-phase operation. In the first phase, they would kill 10 white people a day, every day, for 30 days, which he figured would cause, a general level of upsetness in the city, before the pair would make their way to Canada, stopping at orphanages and adopting young boys, to which he would then train for years in explosives and shooting and all kinds of
pistols only?
Boy Scout techniques, to which he would then send each of them into major cities to carry out their own attacks and eventually tear apart the United States. Muhammad was executed in 2009, and Malvo is still in prison to this day. Ed Gein, also known as the Plainfield Ghoul, which, again, cool name, while many believe him to be a serial killer, was only ever convicted of 1 murder. Gein is famous for making the skin suits as well as the human furniture that most people know him for, although not a lot know his reasoning. Gein was always very close to his mother, and after she died, he sort of spiraled into insanity. He began to dig up bodies that he said looked like his mother and construct different things out of them, the most famous of which being his attempts at a which he said he wanted to look like his mother's skin so he could crawl inside of her, which... And then the parts that he could have used for the suit, he made into lampshades, a belt, furniture, and all kinds of weird stuff. The one murder that he committed was whenever he went to a hardware store and the owner, he said, looked like his mom. So he ordered a delivery to have her come to her house, to which when she came, he killed her. This immediately resulted in his capture, because all the police did was go, oh, this is the last place she went, okay, and when they drove there, he had her strung up, decapitated, and skinned, preparing to fashion her. He confessed to an additional killing, although confessions in the 1950s were weird, and it was never proven if he did it or not. But either way, he died in prison in 1984. Fred and Rose West are responsible for the murder of 12 women from 1967 to 1987. Fred and Rose, by every account, seem to be extreme sexual deviants. The 2 of them owned an inn in which they would regularly hook up with guests. Not only that, but Rose worked as a sex worker in the inn, to which Fred would enjoy the view, and the particularly horrible part about it is the abuse that their children eventually suffered. This would normally consist of Fred abusing his daughters, to which Rose would then say, well, you were asking for it. Fred's daughter of a previous marriage began to become weary of what their parents were doing, to which one night they murdered her. Their other children didn't know about this, as they said that she simply got a job in a city and had to move away, but they would regularly say things like, don't act up, or else you'll end up under the garden like your sister. And once that information slipped to people at the school and eventually the authorities, a whole investigation was made in which eventually Fred confessed but said Rose had nothing to do with it, and they found a ton of the bodies in the flower bed. Throughout the trial and everything that followed, Rose completely maintained innocence while Fred tried to take the fall for her. Although all accounts that were given didn't make sense, Rose had to be involved in some sort. And miraculously, despite Fred's efforts, during the trials, when they first saw each other, Rose kept pushing him away because her strategy was to make it seem like she was disgusted with her husband. This made Fred depressed, who then said she was responsible for a lot of it before he hanged himself in his cell in 1995. Rose to this day is still in prison, where she maintains that she is innocent of the charges against her. H.H. Holmes confessed to 27 murders between 1891 to 1894. He was only ever convicted of one, though, because, like I described earlier, they hang you either way, to which the majority of these murders occurred in something famously known as the Murder Castle. H.H. Holmes was rather rich and built this multi-purpose structure that was both apartment complexes as well as a shopping center underneath. However, after his murders came to light, inspection of these apartment rooms was interesting. To give you just a few things, there were several false hallways that had no end and worked as a sort of maze through the rooms. There were several soundproof rooms made to mask victim screaming, as well as hinged walls that allowed access to one room from a secret doorway in another room, and several chutes that led directly to the basement, which in the basement was the crematorium as well as several vats of acid that he used to dispose of the bodies. It was for this reason that there were never any bodies recovered from the hotel, and people simply checked in and then went missing, which eventually the police got suspicious of, and he probably would have gotten away with it a lot longer. But then, for some reason, he felt the need to murder the children of his third wife away from the hotel. He did this by putting them in a trunk and suffocating them, and then simply throwing the trunk underneath a rental property, to which, someone smelled it and complained, and then the police found it, to which then he was arrested for it, and initially said that the devil made him do it, and he said it wasn't the devil, and then he said it was the devil again, and the stories kept changing. Either way, he was hanged in 1896, but what's interesting is that in recent years, people began to believe that perhaps he used his immense wealth to escape death, and several said that he simply had an empty casket buried. So, in 2017, they dug up his body to show everyone that the body's still there before reburying it. What's especially ironic about this is one of his requests at his death was to build a large cement wall around his coffin, as he was afraid grave robbers would come and steal his body. Which no grave robbers did, but he was re-exhumed because people thought that he didn't actually die. And as for the murder castle itself, it burned down in 1895. So you can't go look at it, but what's interesting is that several people say they saw two men ignite the fires, and there was this whole legend that it was Holmes and the devil coming to get rid of their handiwork. Ivan Milat, also known as the backpack murderer, killed 7 people from 1989 to 1993. The reason for the name is that he would often pick up hitchhikers and people who seemed to be traveling on the road before driving them to a secluded spot in which he would strangle them.
Why want me to come up close?
Back and managed to get away and pick
good
them
morning.
up someone else.
Good morning, what's the word with you? I said, why you want me to get up close? You ain't got no aim or something, bro?
That was recently sold because Milat was trying to get rid of evidence fast, to which Milat was eventually arrested and tried for all the murders. A lot of the
play the win, bro.
in prison afterwards are just weird. Like at his first day in prison, he was almost beaten to death by another inmate, and in 2009 he cut off his pinky finger to try to mail it into the Court of Appeals in Australia because he thought that would make them sympathetic. But whenever he goes to mail it, they were like, you can't do that. And then he was upset that he wasn't given a PlayStation in his cell, so he tried to starve himself to death in protest, which lasted like a week. And Milat eventually died in jail in 2019 of natural causes. We are now on to Tier 3, which going into this iceberg, I had never heard of any of these before, which is why research for these takes especially long. So I can only imagine what the other parts would be, but let's get into it. Brady and Henley refers to Ian Brady and Myra Henley, who were responsible for murdering 5 children from 1963 to 1965. They're also commonly known as the Moore's murderers. Reading about their life, there was a certain wickedness that the two of them had while together. They both fantasized over stories of prisoner torture, as well as researching things like nihilism and developing this whole idea that life is meaningless, but that isn't. Normally the way they would go about their murders is Myra would pick up young girls either walking to or from school, or just out and about and offer to give them a ride. She would then normally tell a story that if the young girl could help, she needs help finding an expensive ring that she lost in the moors, after which point Ian would be there and he would attack the girl and brutalize her before murdering her, and they were eventually outed after being witnessed by Brady's brother-in-law. The two of them were given life sentences, and Brady died in 2002 while Ian died in 2017 of natural causes. Andrei Shikatil, it's Russian. Shikatilo? Andrei Shikatilo is what I'm going with. Also known as the Red Ripper, which, it's such a cool name, they don't have to give it to such a loser. Anyway, was convicted of killing 52 people from 1978 to 1990. Impotence. He became incredibly depressed because of this, especially in high school, in which he didn't feel like he was worthy of courting any of the girls he was interested in. However, he finished for the first time in his life after wrestling a young girl. So Andre figured that the only way that he could achieve that was by attacking women. He eventually moved out of his hometown, and this is before any of the murders occurred, after having several breakups because he couldn't physically satisfy anyone he was with. However, he was kicked out of the school after he assaulted one girl in a pool and another in his classroom, both of which times he successfully did the deed, after which point he began to spiral, and seeing that he has nothing left, began to just attack random women, either they be homeless, or women just taking the bus, or women who seem to be alone. He would attack them and kill them in order to get... Yeah, this occurred after one night he was wearing a disguise and pulled a woman to the side to experience it, and then as she tried to fight him, he stabbed her, to which he realized, oh, that also does it for some reason. He was sentenced to death and executed in 1994, which the only, funny thing out of this entire circumstance is the means of execution was a gunshot to the back of the head, which Eastern Europe was absolutely wild for that. It wasn't like a firing squad. It wasn't like some huge formal thing. They put him in a soundproof room with one guy who had a gun and just shot him in the back of the head. And I'm not trying to make light of death or anything, but could you imagine, you're cuffed, you're going to the death room, essentially, and then the door opens and it's just some dude in a t-shirt with a revolver, hey, you come here often? Dennis Nielsen is responsible for the Muswell Hill murders, which was 12 people that died from 1978 to 1983. Dennis had a hard home life growing up, and the only person that he was really close to was his younger sister. After getting a little bit older, Dennis realized that he was homosexual.
Bro, so this what you really finna do is just hide number? Did you get your ass whooped?
Attracted to certain boys who had characteristics similar to that of his sister. So in order to alleviate this, he assaulted his younger sister. However, he still had the feelings afterwards because, and he simply remained closeted. He joined the military and seemed to adapt well for a while. That was until one night when him and a friend got drunk and passed out, to which he woke up and saw his friend lying there unconscious and got overwhelmed. He didn't do anything at the time, but that began to be a fantasy that played over in his head. And not only being the person who would commit the act, but to also be the victim, as several times he would pretend to be unconscious in revealing positions, hoping that someone would do something to him. It's so gross. After he got out of the military, he tried to begin legitimate relationships while out of the closet. However, none of them seemed to work out. It was during this frustration that he realized the ultimate form of his fantasy was a body. So as soon as he got someone else to stay over at his house, he murdered them, to which he then kept their body for some time. You know the rest. As mentioned earlier, he did this with 12 different men, and the thing that got him put away was a clogged drain. See, after these bodies got to a point that he couldn't use them anymore, he would chop up most of the pieces and bury them, but some of them he would flush down the drain. This eventually resulted in a clogged drain, to which a plumber came and looked at it, and after opening it, found human hair and other remains, to which the plumber freaked out and says, "This looks like human skin." To which Dennis replied with, "I guess someone flushed their fried chicken." The plumber took a sample, informed the police, who then came and arrested Dennis, to which he confessed to everything. He was given a life sentence and died of natural causes in 2018. The Grim Sleeper, whose real name is Lonnie David Franklin Jr., is responsible for 10 murders that occurred between 1985 and 2007. Lonnie was dishonorably discharged from the military when he sexually assaulted a young girl while stationed in Germany. The murders themselves of the Grim Sleeper came from him sexually assaulting women before killing them. The reason he got the name the Grim Sleeper is because there was a 14-year gap in the murders. It's believed it's because he had a kid during that time, and possibly for a while put away the murder aside, but then it came back. And that son ended up being the thing that put it away. They had a positive DNA match for one of the victims that occurred in the 80s, however, there were no matches for it. So fast forward way later to 2007, when they did another test on it just to see if something turned up, and Lonnie's son turned up as being a close enough match. The reason was Lonnie's son had DNA in the system after he was arrested for a weapons charge. Of course, that wouldn't make sense for his son to be the killer because he wasn't even alive when the early ones happened. However, it may mean that his dad did. And sure enough, whenever they went to investigate, they found hundreds of tapes and images that he had taken of his victims, which, you know, is a pretty good sign he did it. And the Grim Sleeper died of natural causes last year while in prison. Stephen Ford was given a life sentence in 2016 for 4 murders and a lot of sexual abuse. See, it's widely believed that Stephen never even meant to kill those 4 people. What Stephen would do is he would regularly go to bars in which he would drug them in using a date rape drug and take them back to his house before doing the deed and then dropping them off somewhere. The 4 people who died were determined to have died from an overdose of this date rape drug. And it was apparent that Stephen didn't really know what to do with the murders and kind of panicked after they happened. Like, for example, the first one he dropped off on a street and then called the police saying that he saw someone pass out and they should probably do something about it. And then he dropped the others off by a church out in the countryside, which the same woman found the 2 bodies on 2 separate occasions while walking their dog, which begs the question, how many dead bodies do you have to find on the same road before you walk your dog in another direction? And the last one he wrote a fake suicide note for, so the kind of sporadic actions afterwards implies that he didn't really mean to kill him. It's still totally responsible, but doesn't mean that that was his first option. And because of this, he was given the name of the Grinder Killer, which is so much more fitting than the other ones. Like, imagine if a guy murdered a bunch of people and then they called him, like, the Tinder Bender. Like, that's so ridiculous. And they should be made fun of, so why not make fun of them? I don't know why we don't do that more often. Also, before any of this came to life, Stephen Coral was on an episode of MasterChef, which I couldn't not mention. Dean Coral is responsible for killing 28 boys from 1970 to 1973. These murders were known as accused in mass murders. Coral had 2 accomplices, which were each teenage boys. Coral would pay the boys $200 each to drive around, try to find some teenage boy by themselves, and either say that they were going to go get high or go to a party or just give the kid a ride, which the kid would then get in the vehicle, they would drive to Coral's house, and that's where Coral would do the deeds. Normally what would happen is Coral would get the boys very drunk, to which he would then take the victim and tie them up before abusing them over the course of several days before shooting them and disposing of the body. However, the story of how Coral got brought down is very interesting. So one of those accomplices, a boy named Henley, had his friend with him who Coral had said can just come over to drink and smoke because there was a sort of weird friendship between them, and that Coral wouldn't kill his friend. However, before leaving Henley's house, he heard commotion from his neighbor's house. And it turns out his neighbor, a young girl about his age, was being attacked by her alcoholic father, which Henley said, why don't we just come hang out with us? After showing up, Coral was immediately outraged by the fact that Henley had brought a girl, saying that he ruined everything. Coral eventually got over it, and after getting really high, they all passed out. And whenever Henley woke up, he was being tied up like the other victims of Coral. Henley convinced Coral not to kill him, and instead said that he'll help him do the murders of these 2 others, to which Henley then took an opportune moment, stole the gun away, and shot Coral to death. However, despite being responsible for Coral's death, Henley, as well as the other accomplice, were still responsible for kidnapping a ton of boys, and even possibly assisting with the murders and torture. So they were each given life sentences, to which the other accomplice died last year due to COVID, and Henley is still serving his life sentence. Now, what's especially interesting, or should I say terrifying about Coral, is that he told the 2 young boys that he was part of a national group that trades around young boys. And when going through the pictures that Coral had, there were several boys seen in the images that were not found among the bodies, implying that there were many more victims. Because remember, Coral's dead now, so the only ones who said what actually happened were the 2 boys, as well as the evidence of the bodies they found. So those extra pictures implies that there were many more victims, quite possibly of a much bigger scheme. Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer, was responsible for 49 murders between the 1980s and 1990s. Ridgway was weird from the get-go. Like, when he was 16 years old, he stabbed a 6-year-old child in an attempt to murder him, and never got punished for it. And growing up, he became a sort of sex addict who was also really interested in the Bible. So he would talk about things like the love of God, and then proceed to have these intense fantasies to do with random women. See, Ridgway was married to several women who demanded that they have that several times a day. Not only that, but in public and revealing places. So what Ridgway would do is he would get sex workers to fulfill these fantasies, to which, in an intense moment of post-nut clarity, he would think about how much he hates sex workers and then kill them. Most often ditching the bodies
If
at
I'm
the
not
same
good
places
and I'm
he
whooping
committed
your
the
ass, what that
crime,
makes you,
and in
bro?
places where it wasn't necessarily public, like a forest.
Did you really just pull out a sniper? Oh my god. Oh my god. Good thing, bro. Oh my god. You embarrassing yourself. You know that, right?
And what's interesting is that during his
You know this, right?
interviews, he confessed to 71 murders. Although there were so many, he couldn't remember all the bodies were and evidence wasn't found.
Bro, it
So
don't
they
matter if this your
eventually
main account or not. The same
Although,
thing's still
like I
gonna
said,
happen.
it's quite possible that there were more. And he's still serving his life
It
sentence
is,
to this
bro.
day. Richard Chase, known as the Vampire of Sacramento, anyway, was convicted of 6 murders in 1978. So Richard was a very weird kid. He was an extreme
Yeah, better get them body
At
shots.
a young age, he would do things like hold oranges above his head to say he's absorbing the vitamin C that's going through them. He said that his skull was broken into pieces and moving around, so he began to shave his head so he could watch what his skull does, as well as making the claim that someone stole his pulmonary artery. So, yeah. He eventually moved out of the house with his mother because he thought his mother was trying to poison him. And then he moved in with several roommates who complained that he would do things like walk around the house completely naked, and after asking him to move out, he wouldn't, so they all moved out. It was around this time that he began to pick up random stray animals before killing and eating them raw, saying it kept his heart from shrinking. He was eventually brought into a mental hospital after he went to a normal hospital because he injected rabbit blood into his veins. After giving the guy a ton of anti-schizophrenic drugs, they said that he wasn't a threat to society and just sent him out the door. To which he was found a few months later on a native reservation.
So what? You want to have a proper running gun or what, bro?
Smeared in blood with a bucket of cow.
You want to have a proper running gun and stop hiding in the corners or what?
No penalties for this. You can just get a bunch
I mean, that's because what you're doing, bro.
Rub it on yourself, run around a reservation, and it's a Friday night. All the murders occurred in the span of a month, when he would break into people's houses and then murder them before eating pieces of them, saying it's
See, look at that shit.
stronger. He would also drink the blood from the people that he killed, hence the name of the Vampire of Sacramento. And this isn't funny, but it's kind of funny. So, one of the things he said after he was caught is that if he approached someone's house and the door was locked, that he wouldn't try to break in because that meant he wasn't wanted. But if it was unlocked, then that was a sign to come in. It's, again, the whole vampire thing. But one of the houses that was unlocked, he walked into, no one was home. So for some reason, he walks into the child's room, pooped on their bed, and just left. Why did he do that? And I know he's like insane and like had serious disorders, but like what part of his whole health plan is just like dumping on someone's bed personified? And can you see being the family? Like you come back home, nothing's stolen, nothing's taken, but just on your daughter's bed. Anyway, while in prison, he constantly said that he was afraid of the Nazis and the aliens coming to get him. And in one interview with a newscaster, midway through, he just started pulling handfuls of macaroni out of his pocket. Because he said that the guards were Nazis who were poisoning him. So, just middle of a conversation, holding eye contact, just tries to hand the reporter a bunch of macaroni. He then stocked up a bunch of his schizophrenic medication and then took it all at once and overdosed in 1981. The Hillside Stranglers was the duo of Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono. They killed 10 girls from 1977 to 1978. It seems to me like their original plan was just to commit one murder, but then they got a taste for it. The reason was the two of them decided to start being pimps, and when one of the girls ended up backing out on them, they got very mad and ended up killing the person who suggested that girl to them. And after that's when the cycle began of killing women and violating their bodies. So it seems that the two just enjoyed it. Some of these were very sporadic too. For example, Bianchi ran an upholstery shop to which a girl came in to talk about business. She was the last one there, so his cousin pulled him aside for a second. They had a conversation and then just killed her. Juno died of a heart attack a few years ago. ago, but Bianchi is still alive in prison to this day. I have to mention that Bianchi's girlfriend, while he was in prison,
you got that. Let me
tried
stop
to
playing.
strangle another girl to death, and then it looked like the police got the wrong guy. The way they were going to do this was Bianchi gave his girlfriend a used condom, and she was going to plant the evidence on the victim that she killed so that the police would see the DNA and think that the guy in jail was framed for it, which, okay, but say what you want, but that is loyalty right there. Carl Pinzarm was convicted of killing 5 people, although the actual number is expected to be well over 100. And he also claimed to have sodomized thousands of young boys. And yes, that's 1,000 with an S. At a young age, it seemed that Carl was abused in the training school that he went to which he burned it down, and throughout the 1920s went on a spree of kidnapping young boys, sodomizing them, murdering them, and then ditching them. He is only convicted for 5 because that's the 5 the police knew of that they approached him with, but again, back in the 20s and 30s, 1 or 1,000 is the same penalty. After going to prison, he told one of the guards that the first person that gives me trouble is going to die. To which, sure enough, one of the foremen gave him a hard time, so he beat him to death in the prison. For that murder, he was sentenced to death in 1930, and while on death row, one of the guards bought him a cigarette. Carl was so amazed by this act of kindness that he asked for pen and paper, and he wrote down everything. This is where the claim of the over 1,000 sodomizations comes from. During his execution, which he was hanged, he spit on the executioner's face while he was putting the black bag over his head. And when asked if he had any last words, he said, "Yes, hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard. I could have killed a dozen men while you were screwing around." So, if you can't say anything else about him, at least he was consistent. Clifford Olson, also known as the Beast of British Columbia, which, there we go, school names again, was convicted of the murder of 11 children in the early 1980s. The way he went about most of these killings is he would catch the children either while they were on their own, or abduct them from a crowd, which he would strangle them and run their body in a secretive location. He was eventually caught by the police, in which he made a really weird deal to give up the locations of the bodies of the kids he killed. Clifford made a deal with the Canadian police that he would be given 10,000 Canadian dollars for every body that he shows them. That money would be deposited into a pension fund that would go to his wife and at the time infant son, saying that even though he doesn't care about these children that he murdered, he did however care about his wife and kid. And for some reason the police agreed to that deal and ended up giving his wife and son 100,000 Canadian dollars for the 10 bodies that were shown, although he threw in an 11th one, which he said was a freebie. The public wasn't made initially aware of that deal until the trial, to which people were then outraged that the person who killed their children was given $10,000 for showing the police where the body was. Despite this, nothing changed in the agreement, and Clifford was given a life sentence. But Canadian law worked at the time.
So what you gonna use? Pistols, AIs, what?
Years. So the judge said at the sentencing hearing of the trial,
what you gonna use?
Should never, ever, under any circumstances, be let out. Of course, Clifford still tried for parole, and in his 2006 parole hearing, he said that he should be let go because he gave the United States a warning about 9/11 and that they had granted him clemency for it. Which, let me remind you, for one, Clifford was being jailed in Canada, and 2, no, he didn't. You got to think about it. This is 5 years after 9/11. And at his parole hearing, in which he's supposed to convince a group of people that he is not crazy or a threat to society, he tells them that the United States freed him because he warned them about 9/11. Of course, he wasn't let out for that, but that wasn't the end of his weird prison controversy. After this news got to the public that Clifford had been drawing on essentially a social security system in Canada that applies to people over the age of 65, and that he was basically getting his retirement fund deposited into an account that he could access if he ever got out. So keep in mind, this is the second time that Clifford has got a lot of money from the Canadian government while either on trial or in jail for murdering children. And at this point, the account had been going for several years, so the dude had like 30 grand if he ever got out. But this time, the authorities actually looked into it and was like, hey, we should probably do something, and killed the account. And despite all these shenanigans, Clifford died of natural causes while in prison in 2011. Leonard Blake is responsible for 11 to 25 killings of women at a remote cabin in California during the mid-80s. 80s. As a child, Leonard was raised by his grandmother, who had interesting ways of encouraging his behavior. For example, when he was young, he would begin to do things like photograph pictures of the female members of his family while they were naked, like in the shower or something rather. And his grandmother found out about it and encouraged it, apparently, saying it was some artistic expression or whatever. And then he started doing
imagine hiding so you don't get killed.
Acid, which again, his grandma was like, oh, kids in there.
Hey, y'all see this, right?
Hobbies. And this steadily building mean streak kept getting bigger, and his grandma kept not doing anything about it. This came to a head when, while in Vietnam during the war, he had a mental breakdown during a combat mission. For this, Leonard was discharged and sent back home to the U.S. It was around this time that Leonard got really into the hippie lifestyle and even married a hippie who then later divorced him whenever she found out that he was filming adult movies that she wasn't aware of. It was shortly after this that Leonard befriended another Vietnam vet by the name of Charles Nag to come live with him at this remote cabin in the middle of the woods. It was during this time that Leonard and Charles would get together, kidnap women, bring them in, torture them, do explicit things to them before murdering them, all while recording it similar to the adult films that Leonard used to make. We'll talk in a second about how they got rid of the bodies and all of that, but they probably would have gotten away with it a lot longer.
Finally, finally.
Stupid move that Charles made. See, Charles had a track record beforehand of being a petty thief. He would just go to stores and randomly steal stuff. One day, Charles was in a hardware store in which he stole a vice for some reason, and then left. Charles told Leonard, who said, well, you know, we don't want to hurt the economy or whatever, so Leonard went back to the hardware store to pay for the vice. By the time Leonard got there, the police were there taking up a report from the person behind the counter, so Leonard walks in and says, hey, it was my buddy who stole the vice, let me just pay for it. The police, immediately suspicious, asked for his ID, to which Leonard handed them the ID of one of his murder victims. See, the way that Leonard and Charles would do it is they would catch whole families at a time, murder all of the men, and normally just keep the woman alive through torture. So they had all of these trophies they had accumulated over time. So when Leonard handed the officer a picture of a man who, upon search, had been reported missing for a while, they go outside and take a look in Leonard's car, and sitting in the passenger seat is a pistol with an illegal suppressor on the end of it. So that's alright, so they brought Leonard in for questioning. As soon as he got brought in for questioning, he popped 4 cyanide pills that he had hidden in his jacket and killed himself there in the interrogation room. Or at least he seized up like comatose. Technically he died 4 days later, but same difference. Which, imagine being the police in this situation. You get a call that a vice has been stolen, so you go there and the guy's like, hey, it was my buddy, let me pay for it. So they're like, why don't you come down to the station? And he just killed himself. Like, whoa, hold on. It wasn't that serious, bro. This gave the police ample opportunity to go back and search his property. And when they did, they arrested Charles, who found the full display of what they'd been doing. Constructed next to the cabin was a structure that the investigators later called a dungeon that was full of various restraints and torture devices and looked like something out of a horror movie. It was there while searching the property that they figured out that the way the two of them would get rid of their victims is by melting their bodies in acid. Remember how earlier when he was a kid he would do the same thing to rats? Well, now he does that, but to, like, you know, people. What couldn't be melted was then compiled up and buried around the property itself, which the police began to find. While also searching the property, they found something that was labeled a treasure map, which while following it, they managed to find.
Bro, shut the fuck up, goddamn. You ain't gotta say shit every time you fucking kill me, dude.
Clothing, IDs, and stuff like that. As well as in these barrels, they found several videos of the two of them committing these crimes. That's the reason that the murders are 11 to 25, because while yes, they found remains of at least 11 different people on the property, they found personal belongings and identification of much more. Interestingly, Charles' lawyers during the trial didn't ask any questions to the witnesses that came forward and seemingly just threw the case. Now, I can't prove this at all, but my own theory is that it specifically says that he began to stop asking questions and all that after the evidence was brought forward on the tapes. So perhaps this lawyer was looking to defend Charles until he saw videos of him torturing and brutalizing these women, and from the logs of what was said in the videos, it was pretty brutal. That maybe the lawyer just decided he didn't want to save this guy's life and just let the case carry on. Either way, to this day, Charles is still in prison as bro. Gilbert Paul Jordan, known as the Boozing Barber, which that one's like on the line of goofy and cool, so I'll let it slide, is responsible for the alcohol murders. While it's believed that he killed between 8 to 10 women, he has only ever been convicted of one charge of manslaughter. The reason being, his murder weapon, as the name suggests, was alcohol. The way he would do this is he would get women to come over to his apartment, most often sex workers, to which he would then pay them to see how much they could drink. Whenever the women inevitably passed out, he would then tilt their head back and pour alcohol down their throats until they died of alcohol poisoning. And that's the reason that even though he murdered like 8 to 10 people, they could only ever get him on one charge of manslaughter, because it's really hard to prove that, you know, he did that rather than just he was hooking up with someone and they drank too much. Even though, while apparent and looking at the evidence, it's very clear he killed these people, especially given the number of people that it happened to, it's hard from like a legal standpoint to say either, oh, you killed this person, or oh, they accidentally killed themselves. To his victims, it is reported that this guy drank 50 ounces of vodka every day and somehow didn't die of alcohol poisoning himself. After like the 8th death, he didn't care what he was doing, so they started listening in at his house, to which he could be heard telling the women, oh, I'll give you $50 if you drink that bottle, but $100 if you can drink both of them. Actually, I'll just make it $200 if you can drink that, and so on and so on. Which, for these poor women who most of the time were in a struggling spot anyway in order to make money,
concrete gang, nigga.
Couldn't pass up, but sadly legendary. But as
concrete gang,
he got one manslaughter charge, to which he served 9 years before being released. And then, almost as soon as he was released, he got arrested for being at a bar and trying to force alcohol on a woman. To which he pretty much gets a warning, gets back out, and then at a hotel party almost kills a woman, but her friend managed to get into the room and save her as he was pouring alcohol down her throat, to which he was only given 15 months for like reckless endangerment. So he gets out and then gets in trouble for doing the exact same thing again and gets off with no penalty. I have no idea how you can look at someone who has definitely done it 8 to 10 times, tried to do it 2 more times, each after getting arrested, and then now you're sitting there on the 3rd time and you're like, you know what? I think he's innocent. However, he eventually died in 2006 of, guess what? You guessed it, alcohol poisoning. It's pretty pathetic that like such a sicko, despite everyone on this list, who like showed proof that if given the chance they would do it again, got the lightest sentencing, like 9 years and then the 15 months and released 3 times and he never got any better. So thanks, justice system. Rehabilitation. Cool.
Hey,
Robert
just for that, I'm finna edit this clip of me whooping your ass and I'm finna post it.
6 months. Although that probably isn't even close to how he actually killed. The police initially
good game though. It was nice playing with you.
Another 20, and then to an undercover agent who was in jail with Picton. Picton said that he had killed 49 and wanted to kill 1 more woman to make it an even 50.
You was sore loser, bro.
Lived with his family on a family-run pig farm. Something that is too weird to not mention is one of the reasons he later said was the cause for his crimes is that at a young age he really fell in love with like this baby calf and he just had a connection to it, and then you know it's a slaughterhouse farm.
Stop being a sore loser, my guy.
One day the calf gets slaughtered and that just like flipped a switch in his mind, which I don't necessarily think if a kid loses their pet they just automatically become
see, you want to be a sore loser, now you finna get your feelings hurt, bro.
When Robert
it's all good though.
Died, control of the pig farm fell on him and his brother, but his brother really didn't want anything to do with the slaughterhouse pig side of it, so Robert picked it up and lived on a trailer on the property. Deciding to update it a bit, Robert converted the barn into a sort of bar strip club area that was known as the Piggy Palace Good Times Society. It was a popular place for raves and strip shows at the time and was commonly visited by the Hells Angels. However, it was during one of these parties that he stabbed one of the strippers, to which she took the knife and stabbed him back, and they both ended up going to the same hospital. The woman, who had a handcuff around her wrist, said
I'm done, bro.
Picton, who handcuffed her and then tried to stab her, to which she managed to wrestle the weapon away and stab him, pointed out that the key to her handcuff was in Picton's pocket, which, when the people at the hospital checked, it was, and they managed to unlock her. However, he never saw trial for this because no attorney thought that her story would stand up because she tested positive for several drugs and she was a less than desirable candidate. I don't know, you know how the law works. So he pretty much got off of the situation scot-free. However, there was a local police officer who noticed that several of the women who worked on the corners or sex workers who would normally come and talk to him throughout the day began to disappear. About this, so he asked one who said that the most recent missing person had went to go check out the old pig place, to which it turned out that several of these women who Picton had picked up to bring back to his property had just disappeared. Given that and the previous stabbing history, the police launched an investigation, to which they found several personal
Bro, stop sending invites. I'm not joining you, bro.
On his property. However, his argument was, yeah, they came over, maybe they dropped a card or a purse or whatever.
I don't know. You probably gotta make a new whatever the fuck that shit called, a new character, bro.
Never able to find any body parts, to which the absolutely horrifying idea came forward that perhaps.
Bro, how do you make me quit? You only won one match, nigga. Actually, this video from the show who actually won, bro. So it don't matter, bro.
Bodies as food for the pigs, or even worse, food that he's shipping out. This was such a concern that a notice went out to several of the pork markets in the area to check their meat concentration.
Towards the end of this shit, your ass wanna run out the match and start shooting rockets and shit, bro? This is a whole running gun. What the fuck is you doing?
Actual trailer, to which they found several of the bloody clothes and effects of the women who were missing. And searching after that, they managed to find skulls and other various bones that were scattered around the property. Also inside the trailer, they found a lot of other weird things, like a bunch of syringes containing a little bit of a blue.
It was probably saying updated appearance or some shit like that.
A pistol that he had placed a rubber.
You should go to it and see what it's talking about.
Anatomical device. I think I'm safe on that one. On the end of it, saying
nigga, you was shooting one first.
Suppressor. Another thing they found.
Because right after I shot it, that bitch didn't even go hit nothing yet. A rocket came my way. So shut up. I ain't trying to hit.
In which he mentioned things like one of the best ways to kill a drug addict is to fill a syringe full of windshield.
I already knew what you was on. That's why I shot one. The moment I shot one, let me guess. One coming right back at me. Instantly.
Hits the blue liquid in the syringe.
Wasn't even 2 seconds after I shot the shit.
Videos of him taking the bodies, cutting them up, and then feeding them to the pigs. See, for those that don't know, pigs were all like cute and sweet.
It ain't happening to stop accent though.
But pigs in the wild are like really feral. And by really feral, I mean they're not only scavengers, but they'll rip bigger animals apart in groups and then eat them. So there's kind of a belief on pig farms.
I won the first one, it was a tie the second one, you won the third one. Cool.
Because they could go rabid at any second. So all Robert had to do was take these bodies, cut them enough so they bleed, throw them to the pigs, and then throw away whatever they didn't eat. And to you right now who's watching this while eating spaghetti with marinara or meat sauce, you're welcome for that visual. Thankfully, however, he had never sent the body parts off with the meat.
Bro, stop sending invites, nigga.
I guess that's one plus. And the reason he was only ever tried for 6 murders is because all the other murders and stuff around them, the initial 20 that the police wanted to charge him for, were circumstantial, as there wasn't actually recorded evidence of their bodies and just some stuff found. And the judge knew that if you take it from 6 murders to 26 murders, there's more evidence of like a mistrial that could happen, or in other words, the defense could poke holes in more stories. And the judge.
Oh, that's what you had to do? Alright, cool.
Solid 6, so they could lock this guy away for good. However, for some reason, maybe just a really good defense attorney or what, The jurors were
You can sit out of timeout for a second,
there was a
bro.
bunch of stuff during the trial about
You got 300 seconds.
have done that, which never heard that one before. Or like how he does.
Well, now you had to download from GTA.
Like it's got to be like one of the most brutal serial killers ever. That these people are just like, oh well, I'm sure he didn't know what he was doing. There was even a point to which the jurors asked the judge if they could rule that he was guilty for, but that he wasn't responsible for his actions. And not in like an insanity plea way, and like he didn't know what he was doing, like he's a child or something, I don't know. Which is the reason he was only ever eventually given the sentence of 6 second-degree murders.
Now I said, what you had to download, like the updates and shit?
They take it from first-degree murder down to second, but like, so second degree implies that it was a spur-of-the-moment thing, and you didn't like plan the killings in advance. But this dude literally had syringes full of the windshield wiper, and he hid the bodies.
Bro, you was a little ass kid. Who the hell you think you talking to, dude?
Yeah. And even
no, you
stupider,
tripping.
The sentence for 6 second-degree murders is the same.
What's wrong with you? Yo ass, oh, little ass nigga.
Murders. So he still got life in prison with the chance of parole in 25 years.
Yo ass probably in 8th grade or something, nigga.
It's so dumb. Either way, victim is currently serving a life sentence, to which he will be first eligible for parole in 2032. So, fingers crossed that those jurors are not on the parole board. Wayne Williams was convicted of the murder of 2 men in 1981 for Around this time, something was going on called the Atlanta child murders, in which in the city of Atlanta there were several children being murdered and their bodies found several days later. And since several of the bodies were found around the same location floating down the river in Atlanta, it was believed that it was all done by one killer. One morning, the police were scoping out a bridge where it was believed the bodies were being disposed of, to which while sitting there they heard a loud splash, implying that something had just been thrown from the bridge above. The police then race over to the end of the bridge, to which the only one was Wayne Williams. They pulled him over, asked what he was doing in this hour, to which he said he was driving across town to meet a young woman who was about to become a famous singer. He gave them a name and a phone number, which both later turned out to be fake. And sure enough, 2 days later,
I don't know why the hell y'all be thinking disrespectful people cool, bro.
Over, or supposedly Wayne had thrown it over. Because of this, Wayne was brought in, to which he failed 3 polygraph tests, and his DNA was found on the body of not only that one victim that fell in the water, but another one who had been recently killed that still had DNA remains on him. Not only that, but after Wayne was arrested, the serial killing spree of the Atlanta child murders stopped all at once. And then while at trial,
Probably finna hop on Call of Duty in a second.
He did the crimes and being attacked by the prosecution, he got incredibly angry and started yelling and screaming, which supposedly, turned the jury against him. To which he said during the trial that he was being framed by the Atlanta police for a killing that was actually being committed by the Ku Klux Klan. And while several people came forward in years since saying there's no way he could have done it, most of the arguments come down to, well, he was a good guy, so it's impossible that he could have done it, which you know how that goes. So why am I not saying definitively that Wayne killed these people? Well, that's because while there is a lot of evidence showing that he did, there's just enough for my conspiracy theorist mind to not 100% just say, yeah, this is the dude that did it. The main reason for that is a guy by the name of Charles Sanders. See, Charles Sanders was a chief KKK member who was also being investigated for the child murder.
Yeah, I'm finna hop my ass on Call of Duty. I'm in the process of doing that. I'm gonna go make me some food real quick.
At the same time, Charles had passed on his polygraph test. But even though Wayne failed his and Charles passed his, polygraphs aren't 100% perfect, and there's a lot to go into them, so it's not like conclusive. And the Atlanta child murders themselves were happening to young black children in Atlanta, which on Wayne's side was seen as just victims of opportunity, but to
alright, y'all. Thanks for tuning in.
Also, one of the main things that ended up convicting Wayne is that several of the other victims that were found had traces of not only his